A few summers ago, my friends and I decided to explore the deep woods of West Virginia. We all wanted to get away from the city and immerse ourselves in nature. After a long drive and a bit of hiking, we found the perfect spot near a small, secluded lake. It was peaceful and exactly what we were looking for. The first night was amazing. We set up our tents, made a campfire, and spent hours laughing, talking, and looking at the stars and constellations. It was everything a camping trip should be. But on the second day, weird things started to happen. While exploring the surrounding area, we came across an old abandoned campsite about a mile from our own. It looked like it had been deserted for years. Tents were torn and equipment was scattered around as if the occupants had left in a hurry. There was a dead silence that made us all uneasy. As we rummaged through the debris, we found a journal among the remains. The last entry was dated 3 years ago and mentioned strange noises at night and the feeling of being watched. That night, back at our campsite, everyone was feeling very uneasy, and not much was being said as we sat around the campfire gazing into its flame. Around midnight, we heard some rustling in the bushes nearby. At first, we thought it was just an animal, but the sound grew closer and more distinct. It sounded like footsteps. We shined our flashlights into the darkness, but didn't see anything. Footsteps continued, circling our campsite it seemed, getting louder and more frantic. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to see into the darkness. The footsteps were unnervingly human, but there was no one there. As suddenly as they started, the noises stopped. We sat in silence, trying to calm our racing hearts. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a loud crash. Something had knocked over our cooler. We searched for the culprit, but there was nothing there. No signs of an animal or person. It was decided that we were all getting worked up over nothing and that we should try and get some sleep. No one slept much, if any, that night, huddled together in our tents, jumping at every snap of a twig. The next morning, we discovered strange footprints around our campsite. They were human, but unusually large. They seemed to move from one tent to another and then suddenly lead off into the woods. That was all we could take. We packed up and left as quickly as we could, cutting our trip short. As we were driving back home, we passed a small, rundown cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, and our curiosity led us to stop and check it out. The door was half open, and inside we found old newspapers, empty food cans scattered around, and an ashtray containing cigarette butts that looked like they were only recently put out. It felt like someone had been staying there recently. Among the clutter, we found a small voice recorder and decided to play it. It was a man's voice, and his entries were erratic, describing how he felt being watched and hunted in the woods. The last entry mentioned seeing campers by the lake, and that he was planning to quote-unquote go visit them around midnight. That sent chills down our spines, and we left the cabin in a hurry, realizing that we might have been the campers that he was going to visit. About a week after we returned home, I was at my apartment around 10 p.m. when suddenly the phone rang. I answered the phone and waited a few seconds, but no one responded. As I listened more closely, it was clear that someone was breathing heavily on the other end. I said hello again, but this time the caller hung up. 2 nights later, I received another call. This time a voice replied with a whisper. My blood ran cold, and I immediately hung up and called the police. They told me it was probably just some kids playing a joke on me, and that they would send out an officer to look around the house if I wanted. I told them I didn't think that was necessary, and that I would make sure all my doors were locked and the alarm set before going to bed. The calls stopped after that, but I haven't been camping since, and I'm not sure I ever will again. A couple of years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to go camping in Utah. We wanted to get away for a few days and enjoy some quality time together in the outdoors. We found a remote camping spot near a beautiful red rock canyon with a small river running through it and no other campers in sight for miles. Later that night, after eating some dinner and having a couple of drinks, we were quietly sitting around the campfire when we first heard that terrible sound that we'll never forget. It was a high-pitched scream, and whether it was made by a human or some animal, we couldn't tell. We sat frozen, not saying a word, breathing heavily as we waited, not knowing if we should be silent or run as fast as we could to the car and get the hell out of there. After about 5 minutes of waiting and not hearing anything else, we reluctantly decided that it must have been some wild animal and that we should probably try and get some sleep. The next day, we went for a hike and a swim, and generally had a very relaxing day. It was great being out there in the wilderness, not having a care in the world. Later that night, after we had finished cleaning up from dinner and were sitting around the campfire reading, we were shocked suddenly when we again heard that awful scream from the night before, followed by rustling noises in the trees beyond our campsite. This time, it was unmistakable. The scream definitely came from a human. Frightened and not sure what to do, we both dashed for the tent, jumped inside, and quickly zipped up the door. Too afraid to investigate, we tried to quieten our breathing as we listened. Footsteps could clearly be heard circling us for several minutes before finally leaving the campsite. We stayed up all night, not daring to make a sound until the sun came up. In the morning, we found footprints around our tent. They were definitely human and led off into the woods. We decided to leave immediately. As we were packing up, I thought I saw a figure in the distance, watching us from behind a tree. When I pointed it out to my girlfriend, she looked suddenly but didn't see anything. And when I looked back, the figure was gone. We reported the incident to the park rangers, but they never found anyone. To this day, we have no idea who was stalking us or why, and we haven't been camping since. One autumn several years ago, my brother and I decided to take a camping trip in the dense forest of Maine. We chose a spot deep within the woods, far from any main trails, to truly disconnect and enjoy nature. The days were filled with hiking and fishing, but during the night, strange things started happening. On our second night, as we were sitting around the campfire, we noticed some lights in the distance. They were faint, almost like lanterns, moving slowly through the trees. We assumed it was other campers, even though we hadn't seen anyone else around. The lights disappeared after a while, and soon after we went to bed. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of rustling outside my tent. I unzipped it slightly and saw those same lights again, this time much closer. They were moving erratically, almost as if searching for something. I woke my brother, and we both watched in silence. The lights came to a stop right outside our campsite, and we could hear faint whispers. It was impossible to make out what they were saying, and we bravely decided to confront whoever it was, but as soon as we stepped out of our tents, the lights vanished. We stood there, our flashlights scanning the trees, but there was nothing to see. No signs of people, no noises, just the dead silence of the forest. We went back to bed and tried to sleep, but we both just laid there most of the night wondering about those weird lights. The next day, we explored the area where we had seen the lights, but there was no trace of anyone. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It was as if we had imagined the whole thing. That night, the lights returned, but this time they stayed at a distance, moving in and out of sight. On our last night, the lights appeared again, but this time they were accompanied by a low humming sound. It grew louder and more intense, filling the air with an unsettling vibration. We decided enough was enough and packed up our things in the middle of the night. As we made our way back to the car, the lights followed us, staying just out of reach. When we finally reached the safety of our vehicle, the lights disappeared for good. We never found out what they were or who, if anyone, was behind them. We decided to head straight to the nearest ranger station to report what we had seen. The ranger on duty listened to our story with a concerned expression and took down all the details. He mentioned that there had been similar reports over the years, but no one had ever been able to explain the phenomena. We left the ranger station feeling a bit more reassured, but still unsettled. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The experience had left a mark on us, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we had encountered something beyond our understanding.